He didn't want trouble, just a look at an old rifle he used to carry long before most of them were even born. But the clerk laughed at his questions, mocked his limp, called him grandpa, and told him to leave. The old man didn't argue. He left quietly, like he always had, one step at a time. What the clerk didn't know was that the name on that man's dog tag still meant something. And exactly 1 hour later, an entire Navy SEAL team pulled into the parking lot. No sirens, no warnings, just a dozen men walking in formation, dead silent, asking one question: where is he? Welcome to Story Studio Secrets. The gun shop sat on the edge of town, nestled between a bait store and a hardware warehouse. Its windows were tinted, giving an illusion of authority. Inside, rifles lined the walls like trophies. Glass counters displayed polished handguns under bright lights. Behind the register, 2 young clerks leaned over their phones, half paying attention to the soft hum of country music playing from the ceiling speakers. At exactly 10:43 a.m., the front door chimed. The man who entered didn't command attention. He simply existed in a way that made everything a little quieter. Worn boots, jeans patched at the knee, a brown leather jacket older than half the staff. His face was weathered, but calm, eyes sharp under the brim of a faded Navy SEAL cap. He moved slowly, with a noticeable limp but never pitiful. Walking straight to the counter, he rested his hand gently on the glass and waited. One of the clerks looked up and forced a smile. "Need something, sir?" The old man nodded once. "Yeah. Wondering if you still carry the M1 Garand replica." "Oh, from the back wall. The real stock model," the kid blinked. "That's a collector's piece, not something you'd want to fire." "I didn't ask to fire it," the man said evenly. "Just wanted to hold it for a moment." "Haven't touched one in decades," the second clerk chuckled. "That rifle's heavier than it looks, Pops. Might be a bit much for your back." The old man didn't smile. "I used to carry one across jungles. I can manage it across a showroom." That's when the tone changed. The first kid laughed too loud. "Okay, Rambo. Unless you're buying, you're just taking up space. Let the real customers in." The second clerk added, "Yeah, we're not a museum." The old man paused for a second. It looked like he was going to say something, maybe correct them, maybe remind them who he was. But instead he looked down at the counter, nodded to himself, and simply said, "Understood." He turned around, walked to the door, and left. No protest, no anger, no demand to speak to the owner, just one man, alone again, walking slowly back toward a country that had forgotten what some men gave for it. Inside, the clerks went back to scrolling their phones. Neither noticed the woman by the ammo rack, a woman in her mid-30s, gym shirt, ball cap pulled low, watching the scene in silence. 2 minutes later, outside, she pulled a phone from her pocket and made a single call. She said only 3 words. He was there. At 11:43 a.m., the parking lot began to fill, but not with customers. A matte black SUV pulled in and parked close to the entrance. The engine stayed on. A minute later, another vehicle parked beside it. Then a third. No music, no movement. Just quiet humming machines with dark glass and tinted intentions. Inside, the clerks were still joking, still scrolling through their phones, still unaware of the shifting atmosphere outside. Then the doors opened. 3 at once. 12 men stepped out. Their movements were deliberate, unhurried, but carried a weight that made people stop mid-step. They weren't loud, they didn't shout, but something about their presence made the air feel heavier. Some wore civilian clothes, some dress uniforms. Most didn't need either. The way they walked told you who they were. It was in their shoulders, in their eyes, in the way they scanned the street out of habit, not nerves. They crossed the sidewalk in silence and stepped through the front door one by one. The chime rang softly as they entered, but even that sound felt different. Not a single word was spoken. They simply spread out in a calm, semicircular formation facing the counter. The youngest clerk barely looked up from his phone. "Welcome in, gents. Looking for anything specific today?" he said without much interest. Then he glanced up and froze. 12 men, still quiet, eyes locked on him. The oldest of them, with graying hair, square jaw, chest bearing rows of ribbons, and the unmistakable sealed trident, stepped forward. "An hour ago," he said evenly, "one of us walked through this door." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit with force. The second clerk cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding." The man cut him off with nothing but a look. "He didn't come here to be honored," the SEAL continued. "Didn't ask to be recognized. He just wanted to see a rifle he hadn't touched since Vietnam. Your staff laughed, called him grandpa, told him to leave. You didn't ask who he was. You didn't care." He placed something on the counter, a scorched flag patch, folded and worn. "He pulled this off my uniform when I was bleeding out in Helmand. Carried me out on foot, 22 hours. No radio, no backup. A hole in his side the size of a fist. He never told anyone about it. Never asked for thanks. But when he walked in here today, you treated him like a problem." The younger clerk swallowed hard, shifting in place, eyes flicking toward the door as if hoping to escape. The SEAL didn't move. "We're not here for revenge. We don't need an apology. But he won't speak for himself, so we're speaking for him." Another SEAL stepped forward and placed a photo on the glass. 8 men, arms slung over shoulders, dust-caked and sunburned, but smiling. The man in the center was younger then, unmistakable now. The clerk's mouth opened slightly. "I didn't know." The lead SEAL nodded slowly. "Exactly. You didn't ask. No threats, no demands, just truth." Then the first man turned. The others followed, 12 of them walking out the same way they came in, without fanfare, without sound, just leaving behind a silence no bullet could replicate. The SEALs had come and gone, but something had shifted in the air. Inside the gun shop, the 2 young clerks sat behind the register, paralyzed. They hadn't said a word to each other in over an hour. On the counter still lay the photograph. The 8 dusty, sunburnt men standing in the desert, arms slung across each other's shoulders. In the middle stood Beckett, younger, but unmistakable. Customers who trickled into the store didn't ask about ammunition or firearms. Instead, they paused at the counter, their eyes drawn to the black and white photo. They asked the same question, whispered, like it carried weight. Who was the man they came for? The clerks had no real answer. For the first time they realized. They hadn't just disrespected an old man, they had dismissed history. By 1:45 p.m., the photograph had already gone viral across multiple veteran Facebook groups. It had been taken by a customer who happened to walk in just as the SEALs arrived. The caption was simple but powerful. "When you disrespect a SEAL, you get all of them." At first, most people didn't understand the full story. The post was shared and reshared, often accompanied only by an American flag emoji. But soon enough, someone asked the obvious question, who is the old man? The answer didn't take long to surface. By 2:12 p.m., the name emerged in the comments, James C. Beckett. People recognized him, a quiet man seen around town for years, always polite, always alone, always wearing that worn SEAL Team 3 cap. No one had ever really asked him what it meant, until now. One commenter wrote, "He was my uncle's CO in '91, saved 3 men in Panama. Never talked about it after he came home." Another added, "If that's Beckett, we're talking about a real ghost, the kind of operator you only hear about in briefings, never in the media." The stories flooded in. Someone even managed to dig up an old, grainy, scanned personnel file from a military archive. They posted it beneath the viral photo. It read like something out of a war movie. Master Chief Special Warfare Operator James Charles Beckett. SEAL Team 3, joined 1966. Retired 2004. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart. multiple unlisted commendations, service in Vietnam, Mogadishu, Panama, Iraq. 35 confirmed personnel extractions from hostile zones. No autobiography, no interviews, no press, no self-promotion. Just decades of service in silence. The comments were filled with one recurring theme: respect. By 3 p.m., the local news had picked up the story. The headline read simply, "Silent Visit. 12 Navy SEALs stand for forgotten veteran." The article didn't add much drama. It didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. A man came in. He was disrespected. 1 hour later, his brothers showed up. Back at the shop, silence lingered like a heavy cloud. The manager had arrived, pale, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. The viral photo had been sent to him multiple times before he even pulled into the parking lot. He didn't speak to the clerks. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. Instead, he quietly walked to the display case, unlocked it, and pulled out the very rifle Beckett had asked to see, the M1 Garand. The same model he had once carried across jungles decades ago. He placed it gently on the counter, right beside the photo left by the SEALs. Then, taking a blank sheet of paper, the manager wrote a single sentence by hand, slid it into a simple, clear frame, and set it next to the rifle. He carried it once. We'll carry the memory now. Outside, someone had left a single white flower against the front door. Then came a challenge coin. Then a folded piece of paper with just one word written on it: respect. By nightfall, a small crowd had gathered. Veterans, civilians, teenagers, old men and women. Some came to pay respects. Others came simply to witness the place where something real had happened. There were no protests, no outrage, no shouting, only quiet, the kind of reverent hush that said more than 1,000 headlines ever could. As for James Beckett, he remained as silent as ever. He didn't post about the incident. He didn't speak to reporters. He didn't sit for interviews or answer the countless phone calls that now came to the diner where he ate every morning. He wasn't even aware of the storm of attention building around him. He simply continued living his quiet life, waking up at 5 a.m., walking 2 miles before the sun grew hot, stopping by the same corner diner for black coffee, no cream, no sugar, sitting alone at the back booth, the one no one ever asked, to share. But people began to notice. When Beckett passed them on the sidewalk, they didn't glance past him anymore. They looked twice. A few nodded. Some stood a little straighter. And many, though they said nothing, offered small gestures of respect. A hand over the heart, a quiet salute, a simple tip of the cap. The town had changed. They now knew who they had asked to leave and who had silently answered in his place. The story had spread far beyond their small town. Veteran forums were buzzing. Radio talk shows mentioned it in reverent tones. Even a few policy briefings behind closed doors quietly referenced what had happened. But through it all, one person remained silent: James Beckett. He hadn't changed his routine. Every morning he woke before sunrise. He walked his 2 miles. He visited the same small diner on Main Street. He ordered the same black coffee, no sugar. He sat in the same back, a booth, the one no one ever asked to share. Yet everything around him had shifted. People glanced up when he entered now. Veterans from different generations nodded their respect. Some civilians placed quiet tokens at the edge of his booth. A folded note, a unit patch, a coin left face down. All unspoken gestures. The town had begun to recognize the man they had once overlooked. At the high school, something remarkable happened. When the history teacher invited veterans to speak to students, Beckett, as expected, didn't respond. But a week later, the principal received a plain envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single handwritten letter. It wasn't about Beckett, not directly. The letter described a rescue mission in 1970, a mission where 6 soldiers, trapped behind enemy lines, were extracted under heavy fire. No names, no boastful claims. Just a map coordinate and the names of the 6 men saved. The principal framed the letter and hung it in the main hallway without ceremony. Students walking past paused often, reading every word. They didn't need to know who wrote it. They already knew. Back at the gun shop, the transformation was complete. The scorched flag patch remained mounted in glass beside the M1 Garand display. The owner, who hadn't been there on the day of the incident, quietly added a small inscription beneath it, for the man we didn't recognize, and the brothers who wouldn't let us forget. Customers no longer came just to buy guns. Veterans came to share stories. Some brought their children to teach them about respect. Many left patches or notes of their own. The shop had become less of a store and more of a silent memorial. 2 weeks after the SEALs had first appeared at the gun shop, they returned to town. But this time, they weren't going to the shop. They were going to the diner. It was late morning. Beckett was already sitting in his usual booth, sipping his coffee. The bell over the diner door chimed softly as the first SEAL entered. Then another, then another. One by one, 12 men filled the small space. They didn't take a table, they didn't make a scene. They didn't speak. They simply stood silently around Beckett's booth, as if forming a silent perimeter around their brother. The diner grew completely still. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations halted. The waitress froze behind the counter. Beckett calmly looked up from his coffee. His eyes met theirs one by one. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Finally, the youngest SEAL, the one who hadn't even been born when Beckett retired, stepped forward. His voice was soft but steady. "Sir, if it's all right, we'd like to sit with you." Beckett studied him for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he gave a single small nod. "Sit." They filled the booth, squeezing in shoulder to shoulder. No words were exchanged after that. For the next hour, the only sound in the diner was the occasional clink of a coffee cup and the low hum of the fridge. No one dared interrupt. The air was thick with unspoken stories only they understood. That single hour was worth more than any medal, any ceremony, any speech. It was brotherhood, the bond that didn't need to be explained, didn't need to be put into words. The kind of loyalty forged not in comfort, but in the hardest moments of life, and carried long after the missions ended. As the SEALs finally rose to leave, one of them quietly placed a small box on the table. Inside was a freshly minted challenge coin, bearing Beckett's old team insignia. On the edge was engraved a single line, "Still carrying the load." Beckett closed the box and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside the diner, people watched as the SEALs walked away one by one, disappearing back into their vehicles as silently as they had arrived. But something was different this time, because now the entire town carried the weight of that moment with them. They had seen what most never do: real loyalty, real brotherhood. The kind that speaks loudest in silence. James Beckett never changed. He continued his quiet life, never sought attention, never gave interviews, never told war stories. But the town changed around him. Whenever someone new arrived at the diner, the waitress would quietly point toward the back booth and say, "That's Chief Beckett." And that was enough, because now everyone knew what those 3 words meant. The gun shop remained open, but it was never quite the same. Its reputation had been rewritten, not by scandal, but by transformation. At the counter, the M1 Garand stayed on display. The simple handwritten message beside it read, "He carried it once, we'll carry the memory now." Veteran forums around. The world continued to share Beckett's story. One veteran-owned publication eventually wrote the line that would be quoted for years to come. James Beckett didn't need to speak. His silence was covered by 12 voices who chose not to raise theirs either. And that is how some men live, without applause, without praise, without ever asking for recognition. Their story is carried by those who remember. Some men don't need titles, applause, or medals to define who they are. Chief James Beckett was one of them. He never asked for recognition, never told his story, and never demanded respect, because real warriors let their actions speak, long before anyone else notices. In one silent hour at a small-town gun shop, the world saw what brotherhood truly means. It's not about shouting or fighting. It's about standing, quietly, firmly, without hesitation. 12 Navy SEALs showed up not for revenge, but for honor, to speak where Beckett would not. And in doing so, they reminded an entire town, and eventually the world, of a truth we too often forget. Those who serve carry their sacrifices long after the war is over. Beckett's story is not unique, but it is rarely seen. Every town has its silent warriors, men and women who walk quietly among us, carrying memories heavier than any uniform. At Story Studio Secrets, we share these stories to ensure their silence is never mistaken for insignificance, because while they may ask for nothing, they deserve everything.